رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So tonight, inshallah, the majority of the qira'ah will be in Surat Al-A'raf. We have one last page of Surat Al-An'am, not even a full page, honestly, that I'll recite in Surat Al-Isha, in Salat Al-Isha. And then the majority of the recitation will be in Surat Al-A'raf, leaving again, unfortunately, a little bit at the end that we'll do tomorrow. And then start with Surat Al-Anfal and Surat Al-Tawbah tomorrow. Surat Al-A'raf continues what Surat Al-An'am began. Surat Al-An'am began talking about the individual relationship you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It comes there. I always make this comment every year, just as a reminder. Why didn't he start with Surat Al-An'am? It makes sense for us. So you start with the relationship, right? No, you started with the job and the methodology and the way to, and all that stuff. And then after you understand all of that, okay, now here's what you need to make sure that you never lose sight of. You never lose sight of your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this whole story. You have to know Allah well, and you have to have that relationship as the guiding factor that you're going to use to continue to do everything that you just talked about in the surahs before. So it's actually strategically placed where it is. It was revealed to the Sahaba earlier, if you think about it. Baqarah, Ali Imran, Nisa, Ma'idah, all Madani surahs. An'am is a Makki one, and so is A'raf. So these were revealed, right, in terms of revelation. They came way before. But then when the Quran was put together, they came later. And strategically, and that's why every surah in the Quran has at least two dimensions. You know, when it was revealed and where it is in the Mus'haf. And the third dimension is what it does for you. Like that's its third one, how it affects you as an individual in the context of when you're living and where you're living. That's how I look at the Quran. That's how you look at the Quran as well. So An'am talks about that. It talks about that individual relationship, which is Iman, and it defines it and explains what it's going to look like in a very elegant manner. And then Surat Al-A'raf, it talks about the relationship communities have with Allah. It says that that salvation is the salvation of communities. It's not the salvation of just of individuals. It's the salvation of communities. And communities, in order for them to do well, they have to rid themselves of indifference. And they have to be able to be decisive when it comes to their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's funny, the Quran offers sociological insights on the human experience. It's not just psychological and spiritual, which is the majority of what the Quran does. It looks at the spiritual, psychological, and the law. But then there's a sociological aspect of the Quran. You have these surahs that talk about how communities have to behave. Surah Al-An'am talks about how you, as an individual, has to behave. But then when it comes to communities, it's a little bit different. They behave a little. The focus here becomes a little bit different. It becomes based on the fact that you can't lack decisiveness. A community that does not take stands, that does not have defining positions and defining principles, it doesn't function. And that decisiveness, the opposite of it being ghafla or indifference, is what Surah Al-A'raf talks about, and that's how communities survive. If we want to actually save ourselves and find salvation and survival, we have to do that through saving our communities. It has to be a communal effort, meaning you have to be looking at your society and you're trying to make sure that your society is taken care of. Either we sail together or we sink together. And that's what Surah Al-A'raf focuses on the community. If you think about it, both of them are Makki surahs. Give me one story of one prophet in Surah Al-An'am. Go ahead. I'll wait. Do we have one? We have one. I didn't I'll ask the question with nothing for him. There's one prophet that's talked about, just a page. Ibrahim alayhi salam, إِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ لِأَبِيهِ آزَرَ أَتَتَّخِذُ أَصْنَامًا آلِهَةً. But the story of this prophet in Surah Al-An'am is his personal struggle. It was Ibrahim alayhi salam's process of accepting Iman. He looks at the stars, he looks at the moon, he looks at the sun. It's him coming along to understand what Tawheed is and understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. But that's the only one. Then he sees Surah Al-A'raf. Surah Al-A'raf are just stories. It's one story after the other. Starts with the story of Adam alayhi salam, then it goes into Nuh and Hud and Salih and Lut and Shu'aib, and it talks about a long story of Musa alayhi salam. It talks about these communities, these societies, because either they sail together, they sink together. And that's what Surah Al-A'raf, and it points out how indifference and lack of decisiveness is what causes them to lose their opportunity to save themselves. And the surah talks about that heavily, talks about the concept of ghafla. There's no surah in the Quran that does this as clearly and openly as Surah Al-A'raf does. And I think that's a very beautiful concept to take time and think about. And the reason I wanted to start this a little bit earlier is because I wanted to just point out a little bit for you as a side note the importance of what Surat Al-A'raf carries for us. And all of the Quran is important. But as I was just saying to you, there's a third dimension for every surah, which is what it does for you. And it's completely acceptable, and actually it's encouraged, that some surahs or some verses will mean more to you than others based on your context. For sure, some surahs in the Quran, some verses in the Quran will for sure mean more to you based on your context than it may be meant to people who came maybe 50 years before you, or a century before you, or 2 or 3, because of the fact that you're living, the Quran will address people, address different aspects of life, and your struggle in your life may be a little bit different than the people that came before you. So sometimes a surah will be more meaningful to you, and I find that Surat Al-A'raf is very important to us, as maybe Surat Al-Imran is. These two surahs are very important for us to take time and think about, because they talk about problems that we continue to struggle with on a daily basis. We have to start defining ourselves as parts of communities, of societies, rather than as individuals. And it's hard to do that in the West, where the individualistic mindset is very powerful, where your individual liberties and your individual identity is very, very strong. That push and that is taken, sometimes is blown out of proportion, in my opinion, a little bit. But because that focus is so strong, you're led as a Muslim sometimes to follow along with it, and that's kind of how you end up seeing yourself. And that individual approach to life and feeling of accomplishment and of survival overcomes what the communal piece should be, where you see yourself as a part of a society, a part of a nation, that we're only as good as the weakest and most vulnerable parts of that society is. We're only as good as the way that we treat the counterparts of our society who struggle and need help. And if we're not doing that, then we're not doing very well. Even if you rock, like even if you're just awesome, like everything about you is just great, mashallah. You're so, but that doesn't mean much if your society is failing and you're not putting and pumping all of your effort and time into help fixing it. That indifference towards your community is a problem. And to think and to feel that somehow you could make it Yawm al-Qiyamah without your community, without your society, is just a lack of understanding what the Quran is teaching. That's why Surat Al-A'raf is very important. It talks about najatu al-mujtama'at. We're saved through our societies. He taught that, alayhi salatu wasalam, right? In the hadith of Muslim, where he tells us the مثل القائم على حدود الله والواقع فيها كمثل قوم استهموا على سفينة فأصاب بعضهم أعلاها وبعضهم أسفلها. It's a very known hadith. The Prophet ﷺ talks about the example of those who care and those who are indifferent within a community. It's the example of a group of people who got on a ship. The ship is a double deck. There's upper deck and lower deck. So they disagree on who's going to take the upper deck or the lower deck. So they they flip coins or pull straws, and then everyone gets wherever they get. People in the upper decks, people in the lower deck. So the people in the lower deck decide, well, this is tiring to keep on going upstairs to the upper deck to get water and come down again. Some genius came up with an amazing idea. May Allah bless him, mashallah. These are the type of people you want in your society, these geniuses who think. He thought the good idea would to drill a hole in his part of the ship, and that way water will come right in, and then he can drink, and it'll be great. But, this is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. قال فإن تركوه وما أراد هلكوا وهلكوا جميعا. If they leave him to do what he was planning to do, then he will die, and everyone on the ship will die. When أخذوا على يده, and if they go and they stop him, naja, then he will live. وَنَجَوْا جَمِيعًا, they'll all live. And this is the example he gives, alayhi salatu wasalam. And I almost feel that he gave this example because Surat Al-A'raf was probably revealed, and he wanted to explain to people in a nutshell what it was talking about. That you can't afford to see yourself as outside of this group, even if you don't like the group. You often won't. You often won't be too proud of the group you're a part of, and that's all right. Doesn't matter. This is your group. This is Ummah Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. For better or for worse, this is the people you're there. I got you, you got me. This is what we got. Look around you. This is it. This is the group that you have. You can't change them. They can't change you. This is it. We have to learn to work with one another. We have to care. We have to care that we sail together, because if we don't sail together, then we sink together. It's not one person who everyone does. Everyone sinks when it happens. And وَاتَّقُوا فِتْنَةً لَا تُصِيبَنَّ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنكُمْ خَاصَّةً, the surah that comes right after it, that summarizes all of the laws of victory. that I spent some time talking about. So that's what Surat Al-A'raf does. It explains to us that indifference is a musibah. Communities need to survive as a group, and it happens through decisiveness, and that's what the theme of the surah is. So let's go through. Do we have any? Do you have some votes? Or it doesn't matter if there's none. Are there any votes? Is it loaded? Anyone? We put it on. We put it on the WhatsApp group to if people want to. The goal here is that you prepare the. Okay. So how many? What's the highest number? Oh, that's okay. That's good. So the point. No, that's fine. The point of me putting the slides for you and all this is that if you throughout your day you recite the juz that was going to be read during the night, you have some reference in terms of like themes and ideas and what the surahs are talking about, and you have some key verses that I put out there that you can focus on when you're reading, and then you can hear me maybe reflect upon, and then the shuyukh who are reciting, you will focus on them a little bit, and it just gives you a little bit more connection to the Quran that you're reciting, allows you to associate better and feel closer to it, inshallah. So that's the point of it. If it's not working, we'll take feedback, inshallah, and surveys, and we're happy to switch this around, inshallah. So go ahead, start with one that has the highest, and let's go.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ادعوا ربكم تضرعا وخفية إنه لا يحب المعتدين ولا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها وادعوه خوفا وطمعا إن رحمة الله قريب من المحسنين.
So these verses in Surat Al-A'raf, ادعوا ربكم تضرعا وخفية. So when you supplicate, it's a very, very nice verse for us to take some time and think about for Ramadan specifically, because it commands us in terms of how we supplicate our Lord. So you supplicate your Lord and you ask Allah and you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in two forms. Tadarru'an. Tadarru'an means in a state where it's visible upon you that you're doing so. Meaning you're heard, it's audible, as we do, for example, in witr. And even your emotions may come out during that time. That's what tadarru' means. Tadarru' means where it's visible and it's audible in terms of the status that you're in while you supplicate your Lord. Well, khufyatan means in a state where it's hidden, where that's not seen. So you're commanded to supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in both states. The state where you are doing it openly, it's public, it's audible, it's visible, and you do it in a state where it is not, where it's something that is hidden and is secret between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the purpose of what we do here in Ramadan within masajid when we run these, run taraweeh and utar, is to fulfill the first piece of that command, hoping that inshallah you pick up the second piece as you go along and continue to do that after Ramadan on your own, or even during Ramadan on your own, where you learn to ud'u rabbakum khufyatan on your own, between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without anyone seeing. Because you need to have both elements of the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's an element that is public, that we all share as an ummah, as a group. It's an intimate thing to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do it together. We do it, it's a very meaningful. That means we're accepting that we're vulnerable around one another. It's something that you don't often do in life. You don't often show your vulnerability to anyone because you're always scared they're going to use it against you at some point or pick on it. But we do it here. We pray together and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable as we speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a group. But then you also have to allow yourself to have that as a personal piece between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without anyone there. So ud'u rabbakum tadarru'an wa khufyatan innahu la yuhibbul mu'tadin. Indeed, He does not like those who transgress. And he points out, he used mu'tadin here because transgression here is by eliminating or ignoring or neglecting one of these two, by focusing on one more than the other, by only having your supplication in secret, meaning you're not a part of the community. That's wrong. You're oversizing or overestimating one piece over another. Or you only do it in public and there's nothing between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in secret, and that's a problem as well. So it's getting that balance is what he's saying. وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا. And do not spread corruption on earth after it has been granted reform. وَادْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا. And supplicate Him خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا. Another balance in supplication. خَوْفًا out of fear, طَمَعًا out of desire. Fear of just punishment, and طَمَعًا desire in what His reward looks like. إِنَّ رَحْمَةَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ مِّنَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Indeed, the mercy of Allah and the compassion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very close to those who show excellence. So he talked about dua twice in these two verses, right? He said at the beginning, "Ud'u rabbakum tadarru'an wa khufya," and then again, وَادْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا. And in the middle, he said, وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا. And do not spread corruption. The reason that when he's talking about dua, in the middle, right between the two, like he could have just said, يعني تضرعا وخفية وخوفا وطمعا. Just put it all together. I would have explained to you that he's saying do it publicly, do it secretively, do it out of fear, and do it out of desire. It would have helped. But right in the middle between them, he puts this command that is, when you read it, and some of the scholars will comment and say it almost seems out of place, because it's like it's within verses that are explaining to you the importance of supplication. Why are we talking about وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا, and do not spread corruption on earth after it has been granted reform? Because this ayah is telling you that dua, as I explained last Friday, dua cannot be disconnected from behaviors. Dua can't be something that is disaffiliated from your actions and your life story, what you're doing. You can't say dua. It doesn't work that way. Dua has to be aligned with how you're living your life. Dua has to be in keeping with the plan that you've made, and the ethics that you live by, and the principles that you carry, the values that you hold. If it's not, then it doesn't do much for you. It has to be. So that's why when he talks about dua subhanahu wa ta'ala in these verses, and he tells you, okay, do it in public as a group, be visible and audible, do it quietly. And before he tells you, I want you to do it out of fear of just punishment, and do it out of desire in my reward, you make sure that you don't walk around spreading corruption on this earth that has been just recently reformed, if there's reform on it. Because if you do, then your dua is going to be worth nothing. It's not going to be worth anything. This is what the Prophet ﷺ tells us, right? رَبَّ أَشْعَثَ أَغْبَرَ يرفع يديه إلى السماء يقول يا رب يا رب. There'll be a person who is أشعث أغبر, meaning they've been traveling for a long time, their clothes are dirty, their hair is dirty, they're tired. They have their hands up and they're saying Ya Rab, in a position where Allah would usually respond, because you are not only humble on the inside, you're also humble on the outside. This person is humble on both sides. And then he says alayhi salatu wasalam, وَمَطْعَمُهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَشْرَبُهُ بِالْحَرَامِ وَغُذِّيَ بِالْحَرَامِ. However, he eats haram, he drinks haram, and he feeds himself through wealth that is haram. أَنَّا يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ. How is he going to have any of his dua accepted? It will not be accepted. So this is what he's explaining, alayhi salatu. He's explaining this verse here. That yes, we stand there and we say, Ya Rab, and the tears flow from your face and you feel that connection. But the ta'am haram and mashrab haram. The lifestyle has nothing to do with what you're talking about. You may achieve a very meaningful high on the inside. You may develop a connection, and that dua may be something very, very important and significant to you. But if your lifestyle is not reflecting what it is that you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, if the values and the principles that you live by are not that which he talked, then what's the point? If you're spreading corruption on earth and you're saying, Ya Rab, Ya Rab, someone يظلم زوجته, someone is oppressing his wife at home, abusing his wife at home, and then he comes and Ya Rab, Ya Rab, he's not listening. He doesn't care. You say what you want. It's completely useless. Someone who does not treat their parents, they have uquq walidayn. They don't treat their parents appropriately. They have no birr in them. So you come here and you make dua as much as you want. So it just keeps on going. Whenever there's corruption in behavior, you can make as much dua as you want, and you can have whatever connection you want. It's not helping. Yeah, that has to be fixed first. It has to be fixed. That's why this verse exists the way. I hope that made sense to you, inshallah. Let's go to what comes next.
سأصرف عن آياتي الذين يتكبرون في الأرض بغير الحق وإن يروا كل آية لا يؤمنوا بها وإن يروا سبيل الرشد لا يتخذوه سبيلا وإن يروا سبيل الغي يتخذوه سبيلا ذلك بأنهم كذبوا بآياتنا وكانوا عنها غافلين.
What number is this? I didn't catch. 146. Okay, 146. So this ayah comes within the story of Musa alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to him And he tells him this piece of information that is extremely valuable. He says, سَأَصْرِفُ عَنْ آيَاتِي, I'm going to send away from my signs and from my verses, from my teachings, الَّذِينَ يَتَكَبَّرُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ, those who walk on this earth with arrogance, when they have no right to be arrogant. There's never any right to be arrogant. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always uses that term, بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ. You're doing something and you have no haqq to do it. Because if you have a haqq to do it, then no one can hold you accountable. There's never a good time for you to be arrogant. There's no haqq with that. But he puts that in there anyways, just so that it's clear. Those who walk this earth with arrogance and they have no right to do so. وَإِن يَرَوْا كُلَّ آيَةٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَا. No matter how many signs you show them, they will never believe. وَإِن يَرَوْا سَبِيلَ الرُّشْدِ لَا يَتَّخِذُوهُ سَبِيلًا. And if you show them the way of piety and goodness and clarity, they will not take it as their pathway. وَإِن يَرَوْا سَبِيلَ الْغَيِّ يَتَّخِذُوهُ سَبِيلًا. And if you show them the opposite way of harm and loss and distraction, they'll take that as their way. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا. And that is because they saw what made sense to them. They saw the truth and they turned their backs to it. They saw the signs that made sense to them. They could, no, that's the right thing. But they don't want to do it for some personal reason that only God knows or only they and God know. وَكَانُوا عَنْهَا غَافِلِينَ. And they were in a state of indifference towards it. This concept of ghafla, if you take the word and you just follow it in Surat Al-A'raf, you'll find it like it's like a musical note. It's all throughout the surah, just being talked about all the time. The problem of indifference. You just don't care enough. Just don't care enough. Very few people don't care at all. Very few. They exist, but very few. Most people just care a little. Just a little. Not enough to do anything. Not enough to change anything. Not enough to actually take a stand or to make any noise or to commit themselves. Some people, they care, but in waves. There's a wave of they care, and then it falls down. It's the tide. It's the tide. They care a little bit now, and then till the tide comes back again, it'll be. That's how most people care. This verse here in Surat Al-A'raf that I just recited for you, he gives a reason of why it is that they're going to be sent away from these signs, why they're not going to be offered, the access to the signs of Allah where they believe in them and accept them. And the first one is arrogance, and I talk about this every year. Always make sure there's enough verses that have this concept there so that someone votes them in and that we talk about it. The problem of arrogance, when you feel that you're just better than others, or people in general are beneath you, or that there are some people beneath you, or that there is one person that is beneath you. Arrogance doesn't have to be, that widespread. It's enough to be one person. If there's one person that you look at and you think you're better than them. I'm not talking about oppressors or persecutors or people that you're at war with. Just talking about general human beings. If there's someone for some reason you feel that you're better than, that's takabbur. And the moment you have that in your heart, it takes away your ability to access Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's signs. Because His signs subhanahu wa ta'ala, His teachings, only enter a humble heart. Only the humble heart can actually access His teachings subhanahu wa ta'ala and accept the light that comes from them. That nur that comes from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in His book and the teachings that come out of the mouth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all of the signs that exist in this world that continue to talk to us and tell us about His oneness Jalla Jalaluhu and all of His other attributes, they don't find a way into a heart that is not humble, period. So he said subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm going to send away from my signs all of those who walk on earth with arrogance with no right to do so. And they will continue to see the signs and not follow them. And they will continue to be presented with the way of khair and the way of shar, and they'll always choose the wrong one. And that is because they saw the truth at one point, refused it because they were too arrogant, and then they continued on a path of indifference. They just didn't care enough. Because if you cared enough, you would go back and ask yourself, why is it that I'm not doing what I should be doing? Why is it that I am not accepting what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching? Why am I not following it appropriately? Why is it not entering my heart the way it seems to have entered the hearts of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the Tabi'een and the ulama that came after them, the Muslims who committed themselves? What's wrong with me? What do I need to change? That's the question you have to ask. You don't sit around and wonder why it's just not happening. That's insane. You just sit around and waiting for something to change. Honestly, when else do you do that? No one does that in any other situation aside from when it comes to a spiritual problem, where we sit around and wait for something to change. When is my heart going to open? When? I don't know. Whenever you decide that you want it to open. Whenever you take the key out and what are you waiting for? What do you think is going to happen? I ask this question a lot, and I sometimes ask it personally, and I ask it within, what are you actually waiting for? And I get really remarkable answers. I get remarkable answers. Some people actually think that at some point they'll have this dream, and there'll be a man in white with a long white beard, and he'll put it, and then he'll fix you. Or that at some point it'll just kind of happen on its own. On its own is the, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the, I find it problematic when they say, when Allah, what do you mean? You mean that it's His fault? You're not doing well because it's His fault. Jalla Jalalullah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're blaming Him for the fact that you don't have, you're not adhering to His teachings, and you don't feel them, and you're not connected to them. That's borderline isa'at adab. It's borderline disrespectful when we speak about Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. But He gives us reasonings in the Quran. Hearts that are arrogant, hearts that are indifferent will be sent away from His, will be steered clear away from His teachings and from His signs and from His verses, and you'll be steered clear away. Those who are committed and those who have humbleness will be brought back again. Let's do the one after, inshallah ta'ala. A page? I must have made a mistake there then. What is the first verse? What's the last one? It's not وَالَّذِينَ يُمَسِّكُونَ بِالْكِتَابِ. It's not 158. Okay, do the first one then. Yeah, just the first one. I must have forgot to delete one of those two. Go ahead.
واكتب لنا في هذه الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة إنا هدنا إليك قال عذابي أصيب به من أشاء ورحمتي وسعت كل شيء فسأكتبها للذين يتقون ويؤتون الزكاة والذين هم بآياتنا يؤمنون.
So the dua that Banu Israel made after they made the horrible mistake of challenging Musa and asking him for something they shouldn't have asked for, when they were resurrected, قالوا واكتب لنا في هذه الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة, and grant us within this life a hasana, meaning good deeds, وفي الآخرة, and good deeds in the Akhirah, which is the dua that you have in Surat Al-Baqarah that we all know and we constantly repeat. And then he said, إِنَّا هُدَنَا إِلَيْكَ. And from that word, they were called Yahud. From the word Hudana ilayk. Hudana meaning we are being guided towards you again. We are finding our way from Hidayah. We're finding our way to be guided towards you again. So they said Hudana ilayk, meaning we are coming back to you, or being guided back to you again after we went astray. And from that they were called Yahud, meaning they were the ones who were guided back again. Inna hudana ilayk. And the answer from Allah when they made this dua, قَالَ عَذَابِي أُصِيبُ بِهِ مَنْ أَشَاءُ. My punishment, I will afflict it upon whomever I want. And he's saying that to them as he's not going to do it to them. And then he says something just magnificent, which is why I chose this verse for قال وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. وَرَحْمَتِي, and my compassion encompasses everything. Everything. His rahmah encompasses everything. There is no exception. Everything is encompassed by His rahmah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is why when we recite the Quran before every surah aside from Tawbah, it's Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It's the same root with two names that are derived from it. It's not two different names from two different, no, it's the same root, same concept with two different names being derived from it. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's two types of rahmah. There is that rahmah that comes from Ar-Rahman, which is what this verse is talking about. The amount of compassion that is for everyone. That is for all living things. Everyone gets this. And then Ar-Rahim is the specific amount of compassion that He gives those who show Him love, who adhere and who follow. So there's two types of rahmah. There's that for every living thing, and there's that for those who specifically want more from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala and are doing something to deserve a little bit more from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. But وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. Everything is encompassed by His rahmah. Everything. Just think about that. Everything. The hadith we have with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, hadith Muslim, where he says, خلق الله يوم خلق السماوات والأرض 100 رحمة فأنزل منها إلى الأرض رحمة واحدة فبها يتراحم الخلق إلى يوم القيامة. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created 100 compartments of compassion. 100 rahmat, rahmah. Just something. It's figure of speech, obviously, but it's explaining, it's a concept. 100 units of rahmah. He sent down to earth one. And with that rahmah, we find compassion. Compassion is practiced in this world until the day of judgment. Even a female mother animal will lift its leg to allow its offspring to pass from this rahmah. Meaning everything, every act of rahmah, whether it's humane or it's something else, is access to this rahmah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives. And then on the day of judgment, what happens is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes this rahmah because it's not fully used up, and it's added back to the 99 that are there. And then He spreads it upon His creation on the day of judgment. And there's a narration, there's some degree of discussion on its authenticity, but a narration that says, even Iblis will put his head up in hope that maybe he gets a little bit. وَأَنَّا لَهُ. And he doesn't, he'll never. But Iblis sees so much rahmah that day that he wonders, maybe if I put my head up, some of it will hit me and I'll get some of it. وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. Everything is encompassed by His compassion. فَسَأَكْتُبُهَا. And then now He specifies. This is the Rahim piece. This is the Rahim part. فَسَأَكْتُبُهَا. I will specify. لِلَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ بِآيَاتِنَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. And I will specify it for those who show mindfulness, who care, those who are aware. وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ. And those who will put their money where their mouth is, they will give. And those who accept and believe in our signs. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ بِآيَاتِنَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. It's a beautiful concept to reflect upon. Let's do the one after, inshallah ta'ala.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. قل من حرم زينة الله التي أخرج لعباده والطيبات من الرزق قل هي للذين آمنوا في الحياة الدنيا خالصة يوم القيامة كذلك نفصل الآيات لقوم يعلمون قل إنما حرم ربي الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن والإثم والبغي بغير الحق وأن تشركوا بالله ما لم ينزل به سلطانا وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون.
I must have been very ambitious when I put these two verses together. I'll just talk about the first one. There's absolutely no way we can talk about both. قل من حرم زينة الله التي أخرج لعباده والطيبات من الرزق. This is what this is saying verbatim. This is what the ayah is actually saying. Say, who is it that dares make the zina, the adornments that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put out for His servants and the halal of His provision? Who dares make that haram? Who dares make haram the adornments of this dunya? Is zina. Zina are things that are extra that you don't need. الطيبات من الرزق, that's the halal of provision, which you do need. He's saying here, subhanahu wa ta'ala, who dares call something that is halal, something that I put on earth for people to enjoy, zina, something beautiful that is halal, that I put for people to enjoy, who dares call it haram? قل, say this, هي للذين آمنوا في الحياة الدنيا. Say, the believers and disbelievers will enjoy it in dunya. خالصة يوم القيامة, and they'll enjoy it on their own on the day of judgment. كذلك نفصل الآيات لقوم يعلمون. And this is how we clarify and detail our verses and our signs to people who understand. It's equally evil to make something halal haram to making something haram halal. They're equally evil. There is no preference of one over the other, ever. There's no preference. So when you think about something that is haram and by mistake is made halal, and if you're thinking to yourself, that's worse than there being something halal and by mistake you make it haram, this ayah is there to tell you, no, it's not. It's equally bad. Some scholars say that making something halal haram is worse. Actually, most usuliyin do. Most scholars of usul al-fiqh do. And those who don't are usually not usuliyin, they're fuqaha or they're muhaddithin or mufassirin. But most of the scholars who study the origins of jurisprudence in our deen see to make something halal, haram worse than doing it the opposite way. Both are evil and they're wrong and they're problematic and they ruin societies and they ruin mindsets. But the audacity it takes to call something halal haram is beyond me. It takes a degree of lack of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do something like that. that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world for you. And for me to point at something and say, you can't touch that or you can't do that. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His might can do that. Only Allah in His magnificence and His highness can point at something and say, you can't touch that. For a person to do it without clear-cut evidence of it, without being extremely 100% sure that that is the case, that's gutsy, bro. That's a big, I don't know. You're willing to take that to Allah? To come to Him and say, I made all this haram for your servants because I was scared for them. You think you know better than Allah? You think you understand, you think you know more than He does? Or you think you have the ability to predict the future, or you can understand the human condition more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does? You have no idea how harmful tahreem, things that are halal, have been for us historically. You have no idea what backlash that has caused for Islam in general. Maybe at the moment when you're scared of something and you're scared of one aspect of harm within something and you decide to call it haram, maybe you protect people from that little piece that you saw. In the long run, people lose their affinity to Islam in total. In the long run, people lose their affinity to Islam altogether. You don't see the effect of doing this in your lifetime. It comes a century or more later. It comes a century or more later when people start looking back and saying that was never haram to begin with. Why weren't we doing that? Why are we so behind now? Why wouldn't this field now, we know nothing about this field altogether because they told it was haram, it turned out it's not haram, and now we know nothing about this field and we're held back. Now Islam has a negative impact on the progression and on the prosperity of societies, which is the opposite of what Islam is designed to be. I remember on Manabir when I was younger, the tahreem of TVs, and then after that the satellite dish, and after that the computers, and then after that the internet, and then a few years later the shuyukh had TVs with satellite dishes and computers with internet in their home. They used them. When you keep on throwing out, when you take the word haram, that literally means sacred. That literally means sacred in Arabic. It's used only through affiliation as prohibited. It means prohibited through affiliation in the language. And its actual meaning is sacred. When you take a word like that and you throw it out like peanuts, people stop respecting it. And people stop caring about it. And they stop reacting. It's like at home. If everything is no to your son will do everything. If everything is no, then they'll just do everything because there's no point. Everything is no. I'm going to be punished for it all. Might as well enjoy myself. I'm going to be punished anyways. Everything I do is wrong. It's all no. Might as well have a good time while I can. And that's what happened. I have the people that end up leaving the deen, as far as I can tell, and it's a portion of maybe 35 to 40% of them. They leave the deen because they were led to believe that so many things that aren't haram are haram. They're led to believe that so many things are undisputedly haram when there's a lot of dispute on whether it is or it is not. There's a lot of dispute actually. And sometimes it's too late. No matter how much I try, and I come to them and to explain, no, this is not actually, it's too late now. Their understanding of Islam is so negative. It's affected them in a way that they can never forgive it. And it's not really Islam that they have beef with. It's with people who don't understand the sanctity of the word haram, of how sacred that word is, how sure you must be before you throw it out. It's not something you just use to shut someone up or to keep them on the side or because you're scared of something or you're not sure if this is going to be a problem or not. Yeah. Everything in life, there's going to be benefits and risks. Everything. Nothing is risk-free. Nothing. If every time there's risk in something is haram, then what are we going to do? Wallahi, we can't even breathe air. You can't drink water. There's risk in everything. There's risk of there's something being wrong or in everything. The only time you're going to look at something and say it's haram, if it only leads to harm. If it only leads, it exclusively leads to harm. Like smoking, for example. Exclusively leads to harm. And even then, scholars will look, well, the nicotine is helpful, so they took them a while. True scholars took them a while because, there's a little bit of benefit here. So they took them a while. They had to hear more from the medical field to hear exactly what the harm was. Because it's a big word. You can't swing this word around If you do that, you harm the faith. You may protect people momentarily, temporarily. You'll keep them away from trouble for a little bit. But in the long run, they break loose. They break loose, and then they flood the gates. And then there's no hurma at all for anything anymore. And then those who are holding themselves back from zina and khamr and shirk fall into it because you wasted so much time fighting with them over haircuts and using that word over a haircut or over the color of a garment or something that is wallahi useless, and to use the word haram regarding it is actually a huge stretch of evidence. It's a huge stretch. قُلْ, may you be afraid from this verse. قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ. It's like who challenges my authority and makes something haram. Stand up, show me who you are. Who takes the zina, the beauty, the endowments, the extra stuff that I put on earth for people to enjoy. Who dares call any of them haram? Stand up and show yourself. I'm not going to be in that group. And you better not be either. It doesn't mean that we go ahead, it becomes easy to, no. I'm not inviting you to go do the opposite. A'udhu billah. The muharramat are clear. Al-halalu bayyin wal-haramu bayyin. But be very careful from throwing this word around without being 100% sure that this is where it needs to be used. This is the proper usage of it. Fear has never been a good motive to use that word. Fear not of Allah, no. Fear of life or fear of something has never been a good reason for us to use the word regarding it. It's a bad motive. It's a bad motive. All it does is it causes people to lose their respect and their exaltation of the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to me, that's something that I carry. It's very dear to me. It's very important. And I think everyone should reflect upon. I'll end with that. Subhanahu wa bihamdik. Shadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi. Jazakumullah khair.